This is a short video to show how to use the Scupper cluster policy. In this demo, I have two clusters, the West cluster and the East cluster. It's using an example Scupper app where we have a front-end pod deployed to the West cluster and a back-end deployed to the East cluster. Typically, you would expose the back-end service to the cluster on the left, and then you can access the front end and it can access the back end. But what we're doing here is we're defining a Scupper cluster policy that will initially deny the ability to expose the links, expose the services between the clusters. Then we'll update that cluster policy and then we'll be able to expose it. So I already have the front end and the back end services and deployments up and running. And I have an initial Scupper cluster policy deployed to both clusters. So Scupper is set up, the Scupper routers on both. There's a link between those two routers on these two clusters. Let's have a quick look at that Scupper cluster policy. So we're allowing any namespace here. We're allowing incoming links. This policy is applied to both clusters, same on both sides. So it's allowing incoming links either way, and also allowing outgoing link host names to match this particular regex. And that's just the network that I have set up locally with some kind clusters. So initially, there's no rules here for what can be exposed, what deployments or services can be exposed. So if we were to try and expose, we'll get an error. So we haven't exposed anything yet. So right now, if I was to try and make a HTTP request to the front end service, we should get an error. So I have an example command here. This will just try and send some example data to that front end service. We should get an error. Now, there's a lot of stuff coming back from Python, but what we're actually looking for here is name or service not known. Now, it's the front end telling us that it doesn't know about this back end service name. So let's try and tell it about that. So what we're going to do here, we'll follow the steps here. We're going to attempt to expose the back end service over the Scupper network. And initially it should fail because of the Scupper cluster policy. It'll prevent that. So let's give that a shot here. So we're going to change our context to the East cluster, cluster 2, and we're going to try and expose that. So let me run that command there now. So there's a policy validation error that cannot be exposed. So although we haven't specified that it shouldn't be allowed, it's implied by not allowing it in the Scupper cluster policy. So let's update the Scupper cluster policy and then we'll try that again. So I have another version of that. I'm going to apply it in both clusters, and then we'll go again. So let's have a look at what we're changing. So you have two new pieces here. The first is a list of allowed exposed resources. So we have the backend resource name. There's another one here that's using other examples, but so we can ignore that. But the backend one is the main one. And in terms of allowed services that can be exposed, again, we have the backend service specified here. So let's take these commands and we will apply that updated Scupper cluster policy to both clusters. That's done. Now, if we try to expose the backend, that should work this time. So deployment backend exposed as backend. That's just the service name. If we take the same command again, we try it above and try to curl that, that should now work. So we get a response, okay. That is it.